Good evening, and thank you for attending. My name is Leslie Kane, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. Before we begin, please silence all phones and electronic devices. Additionally, please do refrain from any interruptions to the debate as it is being recorded for on-demand viewing and post-captioning services. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor for this evening's event. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and public education measure initiated by Arizona citizens and passed by voters in 1998. The system provides clean funding for qualified participating candidates who agree to abide by the Clean Elections Act and rules. These include contribution and spending limits, foregoing special interest money, and participating in commission debates. We do encourage audience questions, so please utilize the note cards that were given to you when you entered the room and just hold it up. Our volunteers will pick up the cards and deliver them to me. If you need additional cards, just raise your hand. And if you have a question for a specific candidate, please include the candidate's name on the note card, and it will be considered during the second half of the debate. We do screen questions for clarity and to eliminate duplications as much as possible, speeches and/or personal attacks on candidates. This debate is scheduled for approximately 90 minutes, so we may not get to all the audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight's debate includes 1-minute opening statements, and the first half of the debate begins with 2 minutes to each candidate to answer the same question. After all candidates have responded to the question, the first responding candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds, and we'll rotate which candidate responds first. The second half of the debate will allow a different question per candidate with 1 minute to answer, and an optional 30-second comment from the other candidates. And finally, we will have 1-minute closing statements from the candidates. And we ask that you do remain polite to all the candidates and give them a fair and uninterrupted hearing, no matter how strongly you may agree or disagree with anything being said here tonight. Tonight's participants in this debate are Ms. Andrea D'Alessandro, Democratic Clean Elections candidate for State Senator, District 2, Ms. Shelley Keiss, Republican candidate for State Senator, District 2, Chris Ackerley, Republican candidate for State Representative, District 2, Rosanna Galbadon, Democratic Clean Elections candidate for State Representative, District 2, and Daniel Hernandez, Democratic candidate for State Representative, District 2, and Anthony Sizer, Republican Clean Elections candidate for State Representative, District 2. Now, the order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name, starting with the Senate for opening comments, and will progress from that starting point. The order for the second half will be determined by reverse alphabetical order by last name, starting with the House. Andrea, will you start the opening remarks, please?
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Senator Andrea D'Alessandro, and for those of you who traveled from Tucson, welcome to my hometown of Sahuarita. I believe I'm the only legislator who has taught elementary, high school, community college, and university in the areas of mathematics and accounting. I also was a CPA with my own small business. I was elected to the House in 2012, and after 13 months, I was appointed unanimously by the Pima County Board of Supervisors to the Senate. In the Senate, I am the only Southern Arizonan of either party on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I am the ranking member of Natural Resources, Energy, and Water. I'm the mother of one and granddaughter. I have 5 grandchildren, and I am here as a clean elections candidate, asking you to keep my strong voice for LD2, all of the residents of LD2 in Phoenix at the Senate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shelley?
Good evening. First off, thanks for coming. This is a pretty exciting time to see everyone gathered to learn about the candidates in a local election. My name is Shelley Keiss. I am a business owner, a wife, and a mom. I have been fighting for our schools, through the Career and Technical Education Program on the Business and Industry Council. I've been fighting for our military men and women at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as the honorary commander of the 355th Medical Group and also on the Desert Thunder Squadron. I will continue to work for our accountants through the Association of Government Accountants, which I am a founding member of the Southern Arizona chapter. As we continue to move forward and look at Legislative District 2, we must recognize that we are living today in the most diverse and exciting district in Arizona. My name is Shelley Keiss. I'm running to be your LD2 Senator.
Thank you. Chris?
Hello, and thank you everyone for being here. I am Chris Ackerley. I am a Tucson native, and I am going on my 19th year as a physics and math teacher in an Arizona classroom. I had the honor of serving the district as a state representative in the 52nd legislature, and so you might classify me as a relapsing politician. My son asked me, why do you want to do this again? And the answer was pretty simple, because sometimes you get to make a difference. I'm proud of my record when I served in the legislature, and I think I made a difference for the communities that I represented in Southern Arizona. And I look forward to the opportunity to return to fight on your guys' behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosanna?
Good evening. It's so nice to be here. I'm delighted to be here. As your full-time legislator, I'm running for my 4th term, and it has been a tremendous honor and privilege to be your Arizona State Representative. Committees that I have served on, this last session, I was ranking member of Land, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs, and also Local and International Affairs. I'd like to share with you what my priorities are. It's public education, water sustainability, and trade and commerce, which kind of ties into economic development. I'm going to take ideas from Southern Arizona to the Capitol because what Southern Arizona needs is a little common sense and straight from the heart. I'm going to bring experience, I'm going to bring integrity, and I'm going to bring effective leadership to being your Arizona State Representative. I'm a mom. I'm very proud of our son Andres, and I've been married for 31 years to my husband Arturo. And as I said, I am your full-time legislator. I serve on 5 boards, and I enjoy doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel?
Thank you, Leslie. My name is Daniel Hernandez, and I'm honored to be one of the state representatives here from District Number 2. A lot of times when we think about politics, we get frustrated because what we see on TV, where people are fighting back and forth and nothing is getting done. The reason I'm running is because I know how to get things done. I know how to bring people together to actually accomplish things. That's why I'm supported by groups as diverse as the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and the Arizona Education Association, because I'm able to find common ground and find solutions. For me, the last 2 years have truly been some of the most rewarding and some of the most frustrating and difficult times that I've ever had. But I'm running for re-election because there is still too much work left to be done. What we saw this last year with the Red for Ed movement was teachers and educators becoming awakened to the fact that the legislature does not care about education, so we need to make them. That's why I was honored to be able to have people from all over the district and all over the state visit me during that time. I'm proud to have people like my former teachers in the audience tonight who came and visited us up at the Capitol. I met with over 500 individual educators, brought them to the State House floor so they could learn about the process. And thank you.
Thank you. Anthony?
Good evening. My name is Anthony Sizer. I'm a candidate for State House of Representatives in District 2. I'm blessed to run on your behalf to be your problem solver. I am an Eagle Scout. I am an engineer. I have no career in politics, but I want to be there to be your problem solver. In 2016, I wrote a House bill that is about constitutional rights and freedom. The reason I'm passionate about that is because I was an orphan in India, and I lived in a world without constitutional rights or freedom and the opportunity to choose your destiny and your future. And for example, my opportunity was become an Eagle Scout, an engineer, and I got to learn about Jesus Christ as well. One of the big primary purposes is that I'm afraid that if we don't have problem-solving individuals going into office, we have a drastic concern that we could slowly drift towards the Indian culture that I left. Thank you very much. I ask for your vote, and I ask for your support in this November 6th election. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will begin the portion of the debate where each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the same question. This first question is for Shelley. Shelley, what is your position and status with regard to signing the Invest in Ed pledge?
So I have not signed the Invest in Ed pledge, and I want to tell you why. If you're a teacher, I will fight for you, unlike most of the people at the table. We all say we're going to fight, and we sign a pledge, but when we get there, what can we really do? I'm not going to make a promise to you that I can't keep. I will promise you this, Joe Thomas, my door will be open to you, to the Arizona Education Association, to the Arizona Education United. I will work for teachers. I started my career as a high school teacher, a volleyball and track coach. I remember Sunday afternoons sitting at the dining room table putting together lesson plans. I remember nights of grading papers. I remember going to football games, basketball games, being with kids. I remember being a mom to kids that I wasn't a mom to. I will fight for you. If you want my name on a piece of paper, not going to happen, because you know what? I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep. The promise I can keep is I will fight, and my door will be open. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Chris, same question. Go ahead.
thank you.
Sorry.
So, as I mentioned, I am a high school math and teacher, and so the critical lack of resources that we have in education, I see every day. I see it in my students and them not having necessarily the resources they need. I see it in my own paycheck. I actually served on the board of directors for the Arizona Education Association. But when I got into politics, I made a policy that I was not going to sign pledges. It didn't matter whether I agreed with the goals or not. Pledges are political organizing tools. They're not essentially about public policy. And so I made a decision that I wasn't going to sign pledges. And so I'm not going to break that this cycle. While I know we need to find a dedicated funding source to meet our education needs, I am quite honestly a little bit frustrated that the momentum that was generated this last legislative cycle wasn't pushed into finding a broad coalition to find a sustainable solution for our education problem, but was rather turned into a partisan fight. It's deeply disappointing to me, and I have a record of fighting for education. I am going to continue to do so because I know it is a fundamental need that we have in the state.
Thank you. Rosanna?
Thank you. Yes, I pledge, I support Invest in Ed. When I talk about public education, I'm not just talking K through 12, I'm talking early childhood development, K through 12, community colleges, universities, adult ed, CTE, JTED, and that is what Invest in Ed is about. It's about being able to recognize and invest in our educators, teachers and educators, the people that take care of our children, that make it possible for our children to go to school. Yes, I support Invest in Ed. It was unfortunate that it was taken off the ballot, but 75,000 people came to the state capitol and said enough is enough. And that changed the attitude, that changed the dialogue when people sat there and listened to the debate in the budget, and people want us, the state of Arizona, to invest in our public education system, because public education is the foundation of everything we do in the state of Arizona. So yes, I support Invest in Ed, I support our educators, I support everything that is under that umbrella of public education. Thank you.
Thank you. And please, we're going to go to Daniel.
I support Red for Ed. I supported Invest in Education. The only reason we're even in this situation is because of the power grab by the current governor that expanded the Supreme Court with 2 additional seats that got rid of the Invest in Ed initiative. That unprecedented power grab puts us in the situation where we are here today, where the voters are not having the ability to vote on whether or not to support Invest in Education, which would have meant over $600 million into our public education system. So for me, this question is, how do we move forward from here? That's why I was one of the co-sponsors of the bill with Kate Brophy-McGee to extend the sales tax for Prop 301 so that we wouldn't face a cliff after it expires from voter protection, but we need to come together to make sure that we extend and expand Prop 301, because without Invest in Ed pumping $600 million new dollars, we are going to be in yet another dire crisis. We are still $1 billion behind where we need to be. We are still below the 2008 levels of funding. So for me, when it comes to supporting education, I am there with the educators and with the parents and with the students. That's why I'm the only candidate in this race to be supported by the American Federation of Teachers, the Arizona Education Association, and Stand for Children, because I am here. I just spent this last week, a day, shadowing a teacher here in Sahuarita Primary School, because I am committed to making sure that I know what's happening on the ground. I'm still a school board member, and I've seen firsthand the results of $17.5 million in cuts, because again, the legislature has been underfunding our education system chronically. They've been starving it, and they've been doing things like expanding the vouchers, which have drained essential resources from our traditional public schools and put them into a system where there is no accountability. And there have been people in the legislature with severe conflicts of interest, like the chair of the Judiciary Committee, who stands to make between $12 and $30 million because of the lax requirements for recusing yourself and not being involved in self-dealing.
Thank you. Anthony. Let's let Anthony have his say. Go ahead.
So having been a engineer all my life, problem solving is definitely my nature. It's not discriminatory. It is actually precise, on target. It's based on facts. It's based on accountability. If you don't hit the target, you are out of line. Your design didn't work. So I want to say my introduction was about me being adopted from India. And when I was adopted at 9 years old, I had algebra, physics, and calculus before I came to America. So 9 years old. So quite frankly, that was in a third world nation, public school funding in a school where the orphans went to. So I want to look at it from the perspective of accountability. I want to support teachers. I want to support schools. I want to make sure that the funds make it to the classroom, where the purpose of school is the classroom and the success of the classroom, which involves school supplies, it involves teacher salary, and it seems to be in some cases that that those fundings for that specific area in school districts is sometimes chosen to be the last final stop for the budget rather than being the first and primary stop. So I definitely want to go fight for funding for schools. I definitely want to get more funds, but I simply don't want to have lack of accountability and just respond to pounding a fist on the table wanting money when the leadership must expect accountability from everyone who received funds. Again, it is about problem solving. It is not about a political partisan viewpoint. It is an expectation that our children get the best and the highest quality of education. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no clapping. Please, no clapping. Andrea.
You know, there was the last session, it was not a total solution to the education crisis that we're facing in Arizona. It was a small first step. There are still hundreds and hundreds of classrooms without certified teachers. I ran for office originally because of the systemic defunding of public education. I was pledged to not vote for any bill that reduced revenue to the general fund, which negatively impacts our public school funding, long before Red for Ed. If you Google my name in the Green Valley News, you'll see the pledge I took last winter when Dan Scherer asked me what my predictions were. I said we have so many classrooms without certified teachers because of the low salaries, and I said I will not vote for any tax decrease in any way until the funding is fully restored. And I'm a member of National Education Association and AEA retired and proud to be endorsed by them. It's easy to say you're for public education. It's easy to say you're for public education, but it's the actions that count. Our legislature has diverted funds from our especially our district schools. I was at Lincoln School in Nogales today, and bring your legislator to school day. And I know that when I go to the high school, I see algebra books that I taught out of 30 years ago. I find that supportive education is a two-sided equation. It's not only supporting education, but it's stopping the tax cuts, many of which are very ineffective. I'm proud to say I signed the pledge, and I will say again that I will not vote for any bill that negatively impacts the revenue and general fund, which negatively impacts our public schools.
Thank you. And Shelley, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you, Leslie. The question was, did you sign the pledge for Invest in Ed? And I wonder how many of us really know what was in that pledge. The pledge said that we would restore school funding to the 2008 level, that we would give an increase of 20% to pay to teachers and school support staff. And there were two other requirements as well. That is a promise that I think when we get to Phoenix, we wouldn't be able to keep.
Thank you. Please. Thank you. Next question. Chris, it said that 1 in 4 children in Arizona lives in poverty. If elected, what will you do to reduce poverty in the state?
That is a really broad question because the legislature is not the place where poverty gets reduced. What the legislature has to do is when it comes to dealing with a safety net for children in poverty, and not just children, but families in poverty, and to make sure that that safety net is there. This is where I differed with some of my colleagues when I was serving in the legislature. I stood up to restore kids' care. I think it was the right thing to do. I teach at Amphi High School, and many of my students are refugees, and almost all of them low income. And so I saw the effects on my students. One of the things that we need to do is we're going to run into a situation where there's going to be a trigger that is associated with that bill that we did in 2016, and we're going to have to work around it. And I am committed to seeing that the social safety nets that we have, that the legislature has control of, are strengthened so that we can provide for children in need.
Thank you. Rosanna, same question?
Thank you. Poverty. We read about it every day. We look to ourselves and say, okay, am I going to be able to help another person? Well, the state of Arizona, I believe, has a moral obligation to take care of our citizens. And that part of that is being able to provide services to the individuals that don't need a handout, but a hand up. And that's what I ran for, is to represent every single one of my constituents. And that includes children and individuals that are needing the services that are going to be provided by the state. yes, it's a very difficult decision when we are faced with legislation that cuts services, preventative services. An example is Child Protective Services, where we put money towards that, but we didn't invest money into preventative services. So again, it's a vicious circle when it comes to that. So when it comes to poverty, we need to face the dilemma, or to look at the problem that is called hunger. And there's hunger throughout the state of Arizona, and that is part of poverty. And when parents have to sit there and decide between feeding their children or putting gas in the car, or leaving their sick child at home because affordable childcare is not there, that is what is about that. And that is why I ran to be your state representative, so that I can represent everyone. Because if we don't listen to each other, we're not going to get anywhere. And this is a topic that is constantly discussed on the floor of the State House. And when we have those discussions, it's something that I think, and my moral compass starts in, and I look at that, and poverty is something we as the state of Arizona need to face, and we need to look at services for all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel.
You know, what we've heard tonight is that the legislature isn't where poverty gets reduced, and I beg to differ. There's a lot that the legislature can do to reduce childhood poverty. One of the most important and one of the most easy things that the legislature could do is accept over $50 million in child care subsidies to make sure that working moms are able to make sure that their kids are in a safe environment while they go work. Again, this is not about a handout. It's about ensuring that people are able to get back on track, to get back to work, and to be contributing members of society. But when we leave over $50 million on the table for one reason, and that's the legislature doesn't authorize it, there is no requirement for a match from the state government. There is nothing other than we have to okay the use of this federal block grant. So that's one thing that we can do to reduce childhood poverty. The second is we have the shortest lifetime ban and cap on things like temporary assistance for needy families and food stamps. We have a 12-month cap, which puts us at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to these subsidies. So for people who are hurt at work, for people who have kids, for people who are low income, if anything happens and they're living paycheck to paycheck, they can fall off and not have any help. And if they've already exceeded that 12-month gap, only because the legislature has determined in all of its glory that 12-month is more than enough for an entire lifetime, these people don't have any additional assistance. And the thing that I'll end with is, when we look at what's happening, the legislature, instead of trying to find how do we reduce childhood poverty to make sure that our kids are successful, we're requiring fingerprinting of our kids who were of their parents who were on these subsidy programs, which wasted over $2 million that could have been used for programs like food and healthcare, and also things like childcare. So instead of finding solutions, this legislature keeps attacking those who are the poor.
Thank you. Anthony.
So, obviously, I've certainly experienced the environment where there was very little money. In fact, I had one meal a day in the Indian orphanage, and it was, quite frankly, exciting to have rice as a one meal a day. I've certainly lived in that environment. Part of that also comes with personal responsibility. So in India, having been an orphan, I did not have the privilege to get an education. I did not have the privilege or opportunity to be part of a lineage or caste system that gave me the opportunity to get an engineering degree or become an Eagle Scout. America is unique. It is unique because we have the opportunity of our own free will and volition to stay low income because we want to possibly receive more subsidies, so there needs to be accountability along with any of the bills that are processed by the state legislature to help the low-income families and those who are needy. Personally, from a Christian viewpoint, we're not supposed to be encouraging them. Teach a man to fish is what we're supposed to be doing rather than feeding a man all the time, because the man will continue to come back to get free fish. So as a Christian, we're supposed to help grow our fellow citizens to help them gain personal responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thank you. In 2016, in the Senate, several brave Republicans and the Democratic caucus voted to allow Arizona to be the very last state to accept fully funded kids care. This is medical coverage for people. It's basically the people who are working and they're making very low wages. They're not poor enough to get on access, but to pay insurance premiums, it's a real hardship for them. Senator Steve Pierce and other Republicans had to use every rule in the Senate guidelines of our rules to get around Andy Biggs, who blocked it for years. The state lost millions of dollars. I was so grateful to those Republicans in the Senate who stood with the Democrats and got kids care as the last state in the union to get that. This year, the federal funding went down to 90%, and unfortunately, we didn't have enough brave Republicans to vote for that, to give these kids health care. That's one way you can, stop poverty. I'm optimistic that there'll be a democratically controlled Senate, and we'll get it done. The other thing is that we have to stop mischaracterizing our border region. I'm all for revitalizing our border because the people in Phoenix and Washington, D.C. mischaracterize it as a war zone. I live here. I was in Nogales today and Saturday, and no one felt unsafe. So stop mischaracterizing the border, and that way we can encourage business to come here. If they think it's a war zone, we'll just have more poverty, and that has to stop.
Thank you. Shelley.
Well, welcome to the bubble. You're sitting in the bubble today. 5% poverty in Green Valley, 30% poverty in Nogales, and 50% poverty in South Tucson. You're in the bubble. On either side of this community, north or south, we have extreme poverty. So what do we do about it? We have many nonprofit organizations. As a matter of fact, in Tucson, we have more nonprofits than any city I've ever seen. I lived in Panama. I've lived in Thailand. I've traveled all over the world. I've seen poverty. But the fact that we're sitting here today and saying that we have 50% of people living below the poverty level in South Tucson, everybody at this table agrees in one thing, and that is we don't want to see children, we don't want to see families suffer. I'm not a young woman. I've seen enough suffering. We need to work in the legislature to bring up people in our state. We've had an increase of 10% in the population in the state of Arizona since 2010. We have more revenue coming into the state. We have 7% GDP. We have predicted we will have more revenue than we forecast. In 2019, we can begin to turn this around, sending a legislator with a passion, a purpose, and an ability to reduce poverty. You're in the bubble, you know what it is, and you know what we need to do.
Thank you. And Chris, your 30-second response?
Yeah. So just real quickly, I heard my opponents sort of decry the legislature as not doing enough. And in many respects, they're right. But one of the things that I had the opportunity to do while I was serving was actually sit in the rooms as those budgets were being negotiated. And no, they weren't perfect. They weren't perfect at all, and more needs to be done. But for the communities of Southern Arizona, I was able to push a little bit in the right direction. And I'm proud of the work that I was able to accomplish while I was there in that respect.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, in the first half. First half. Second half, I'll open it up. Next question. and this was touched on a little bit. What is this is going to be for Rosanna. What is your position on the funding and building of the border wall?
Thank you. Arizona has been my home since 1973. And yes, public safety is very important to me, but building a wall is not needed. We, as a state of Arizona, have good public servants that protect us. As Senator D'Alessandro said, it's safe along the border. I've gone to Douglas, San Luis, Nogales, and so on and so forth, and we have a safe border. We have wonderful public servants. We have law enforcement that keeps our borders safe. So building a wall is not needed because what it does is it interferes with our environment. It interferes with water, because our water, it flows from the south to the north. And what it does is it interferes with the environment, and we cannot do that. It also interferes with wildlife that wants to come across. So this building of a wall is not needed because the state of Arizona is safe, and we are a state that welcomes people, and we do not need to have more of spending on something that is not needed when we can put that money towards services and towards things that the state of Arizona needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel.
When we talk about the border, I think it becomes really easy to talk about rhetoric and about the politics of the situation. But the reality is the U.S.-Mexico border is at its safest that it's ever been. And it is fiscally irresponsible just to put up a border. We need to make sure that what we are doing is taking the limited resources that we have as a state and putting them where they need to go. The governor has a border task force that has over $80 million that have been invested in it. And yet, despite that, we don't have 24 hours of coverage for the Department of Public Safety along the U.S.-Mexico border. In Santa Cruz County, there are hours where there are no members of the Department of Public Safety on the highways, making sure that people are staying safe. So when it comes to rhetoric, yes, it's really easy to say just build that wall, but the reality is it's too expensive. It doesn't make sense. We have technology that we can implement to make sure that we are using things like drone technology, advanced sound technology, to make sure that we are stopping those who are coming across, who are bringing drugs and weapons and other things like that. But at the end of the day, when we look at the limited resources that we have, we need to make sure that DPS is actually being funded and not being used as a ploy in political campaigns like it is today by the governor, where he had a press conference last week to show off some of the drugs that were captured, instead of dealing with the question of how are you going to make sure that there's 24-hour coverage by the Department of Public Safety on all Arizona highways in places like Yuma, Santa Cruz, and in Cochise County. So again, it's a question about rhetoric versus good policy. The better policy is to use the good technology that we have, the advanced technology that we have to patrol the border. We have more border patrol than we've ever had, but we also need to increase customs personnel to make sure that trade is coming along more easily. That's why I sponsored, along with Republicans, a bill, a memorial that was passed, asking Congress to allocate the money and the resources for customs to speed up the way that business can come across that border. So again, it's the difference between good politics for a campaign and good policy.
Thank you. Anthony.
Okay, so first of all, the wall is actually a federal jurisdiction. There's actually a 100-mile buffer zone that belongs technically with regard to border security from the border, from Nogales all the way up, 100 miles. So the state itself doesn't have jurisdiction to put up a wall up, and that's if they put the wall up north of Tucson, which is kind of funny. But that's not going to happen. That's not a state issue. As a state legislature, I would definitely support any insurgencies or drug cartels or anything that are coming through that we need to prevent from crossing. Quite frankly, the recent Board of Supervisors decision not to fund the Stone Guard federal aid that comes in, and they declined to fund our Pima County sheriffs to be able to patrol that area. Now we've got concerns of human trafficking, drugs coming across with very little patrol capability. So if there was a wall, that would actually slow them down. Obviously, a wall itself is insufficient. Being an engineer, you can build catapults and cannons and whatever else and launch things over. But let's look at the reality is that we need to certainly support things that help shield and protect the American citizens, especially along the border. I've had many tours along the border. There have been many documentations of significant concerns, especially the landowners and the ranchers down there. They're at risk. Their family is literally at risk. I ask any of my opponents, why don't you try living along the border and watch as drug cartels come through, and a single pistol or handgun will not protect you because there are caravans going through with significant amount of ammo, right? Huge concern. So we certainly, as legislators and representatives, we need to be protecting our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thank you so much. If you follow me on Facebook, just my name, Andrea D'Alessandro, you'll see that just this weekend I did a post about the failure of the prototypes that were built. Most of them were breached. A Border Patrol agent years ago said, build a 12-foot wall and there'll be a 13-foot ladder. I have the unique position of having taken both the Border Patrol Citizens Academy in Tucson and in Nogales, and I also went to the Customs and Border Protection Citizens Academy in Nogales, which deals with the border crossings while the Border Patrol people are in the interior. We, both Democrats and Republicans, over multiple years, we asked for more Customs and Border Protection because we have millions and millions of dollars of produce and other products coming over the border. We also have pedestrians and we have people traveling to Mexico, and the Customs and Border Protection people cannot ask for help themselves. We have to be their voice and ask Congress to do it. There are some positive movements in it, but it's still, especially in the winter when the produce comes in, it's a real problem. So thank you.
Thank you. Shelley?
So there is a wall. I've seen it. It's in Nogales. I'll bet many of you have seen it too. But that wall doesn't go all the way along the border, and that's really what we're talking about today. We're talking about John Ladd, who owns a ranch over in Cochise County, and I've driven with John on his property. And from the time we went from one end to the other, someone had cut some of the barbed wire. Now, the problem for John is that his cattle get out. And the other problem is, late at night, people come across his property. That is a problem. The question was, do we build a wall? Well, there's a wall already there in many places. And the movement toward adding additional wall and funding for that is underway. But what else could we do? We could do a lot of things. There's a lot of technology that's being engaged. But the question, what this question is really about to state representatives who can't do anything about it, is about should we federally fund a wall? That's not our decision to make. That's a question for your representatives in Congress and your senators. But what can we do to ensure safety in our community? Now, one of the things that when we talk about public safety, that's a great big subject. Public safety can be anything from police to fire to ambulance to environmental safety. And so those are the questions that we ought to be talking about today. Because you see, this event tonight should be about community first. And what can any one of the six of us do for you? And that, ladies and gentlemen, we can discuss because there are things the legislature can and should do to ensure the safety of the people in Legislative District 2.
Thank you. Chris?
So I believe it's been pointed out that this is in fact a federal issue and not something that we will get to decide at the state legislature. And we're talking about, but there's a basic fundamental underlying question here that I think spurs on much of this conversation. And that is, are we going to enforce the law or not? Are we going to enforce our borders or not? Whether it's a wall or it's technology, the fundamental question is are we going to enforce the borders? And although not running for federal office, so I don't get to make a decision, I don't think that you can have immigration policy if you're not willing to enforce it. Now, does it need to be changed? Absolutely. But the problem is if we don't enforce it, well, none of it means anything if we don't enforce it. So I think sort of the conversation has that underlying tone. And it has been mentioned before, there is a big difference between what through cities like Nogales and Douglas, and then what is in between them. And so it is a very controversial issue. It means something different to the people in Nogales as it does to a ranch on the eastern side of Santa Cruz County.
Thank you. Rosanna, your 30-second response?
Thank you. I heard about funding, and I heard about the governor's border task force, and what this is. As legislators, we do have kind of comments in regards to federal issues, and so I'm glad this question was asked. But at the end of the day, it's about money. It's about money that's coming into the state of Arizona, and how we as the state of Arizona can use that funding much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, candidates. What are your thoughts about our environment and current challenges that we face? Daniel?
Thank you, Leslie, for that question. There are a lot of things that we need to do better in Arizona, and funding the Department of Environmental Quality is one of them. When we look at what's happening, when we look at the environment, there are a lot of different things that means. That means making sure that we don't allow Rosemont Mine to come in and pollute the water of the communities in the surrounding area. It means making sure that we are testing the water and the pipes in our public schools to make sure that children are not being exposed to lead poisoning. And it also means that we work to protect the natural resources and the environment that we have here in Southern Arizona. Southern Arizona is not just a place where we have, booming economy in some places and environment in another. It's one where all of them are working together, where people can go to Madera Canyon and camp on the weekend, but make sure that they're shopping and buying things at one of the restaurants in town. So for us, we need to make sure that we are working together to fully fund the Department of Environmental Quality, which has been underfunded multiple times. There have been sweeps that have limited its capacity to make sure that our citizens are not inhaling toxic air, drinking toxic water, and most recently in Patagonia, seeing what we can do to make sure that we're cleaning up any environmental risk factors that are negatively impacting the health of our kids and of our citizens. So when it comes to the environment, we need to make sure that we're standing up to protect our water. We know that the water conversation is an exceptionally dry topic, but an important one. It's something where we need to ensure that we are looking towards the future, so that while we may be able to do more in development and grow more properties and more homes and more businesses, we are also keeping in mind that we don't go so far out that we won't have enough clean, potable water for our citizens to be able to drink. I just got back from a trip to Israel in June, and while I was there, I got to see the water harvesting technology where they're reusing water up to 90%. Arizona is less than 20. There are a lot of lessons to be learned on what we can do in the environment.
Thank you. Anthony?
All right, so environment is pretty important. Although I, as an engineer and the scientific minded, I would say hairspray is not depleting our ozone layer, and we're not going to burn up in a few years. Just a pun. But the reality is that a volcano blowing up puts out more pollutants than anything else that a human factor can do. What I'm trying to hint at is that, yes, we want to make sure we have accountability in our mining or any other environment impacting businesses or groups that are moving into southern Arizona. Quite frankly, there are plenty of CNN-style publications going on that basically project false narratives. Quite frankly, there needs to be facts, there needs to be truths. Is mining causing water pollutants? Has that question been answered? No. There has been no facts. In fact, there are strict guidelines for the mining to actually present how they're handling the water, what's going into the ground. So for the opposing party to basically say we don't want mining, guess what? That's impacting your economy. District 2 is one of the poverty districts. How are we going to grow it? Large businesses, small businesses, we need to be able to help grow them. Yes, we need to have accountability so that we are not irresponsible to have pollutants and stuff getting out in our environment, but we certainly need the raw facts rather than making decisions on emotional factors, which is dangerous, very dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thank you. I think first of all we have to start with some personal responsibility. I have solar on my home and a water harvesting system, and I drive an electric vehicle. I am endorsed by the Sierra Club, and I'm one of only 2 legislators out of 90 to receive an A+ from them. We have to have both safe and access to water, and I can tell you that going up to Phoenix many days during session and at least once a week during the interim, I come home from Phoenix with trouble with my throat all the time because the air quality up there, they have many, many warning days when they tell elderly and people with breathing issues to stay home, and so it's a real problem, and I don't want Legislative District 2 to turn into that. I have been the champion at the legislature for trying to solve an international problem with the Santa Cruz River. There was a breach and raw sewage was pouring out last year. Unfortunately, our congressional delegation didn't get anywhere with the current Congress, so we have to work to change that. But going on today, when consulting with Nogales, Santa Cruz County, Pima County, and Tucson, we are gathering support for the next round to bring support to this really big international problem that has a big price tag, to get the Army Corps of Engineers who helped out in an emergency to be strong supporters of this.
Thank you. Shelley.
So I want to cut right to the chase here. We're talking about environmental issues. Last Thursday or Friday, I was sitting in a real estate office in Nogales, and one of the realtors said, until we get the IOI fixed, I can't be selling houses. So when we talk about environment, in September of 2016, I sat right at this debate, and the question that was asked of me was, if you are elected, what is the first thing you will do? And I said, I will not wait until I'm elected. The day after the election, I will contact Senators McCain and Flake, Representatives McSally and Grijalva. The IOI is an issue that we must address immediately. September of 16. May of 17, there was a breach of the IOI. Now, what does that mean to you? That means that there were higher E. coli levels in the water that flows north. So we're processing from Nogales, Sonora, bringing it up to Rio Rico. If there's a breach into the water and the water comes north, that affects you. Now, fast forward, July 9th, I attended a meeting in Tubac where ADEQ, Environmental Quality, came and said, you have 5 days to make a decision. The 5 days to make a decision is to come up with $5.some million to the community members and to agree to taking on the operations and maintenance of the IOI, which is an old pipe. Now, fortunately, I was able to call them out on some of the charades that were going on. about the money, and I'll be happy to talk to any of you about that in detail. But that is an environmental issue that has been facing you for 2 years that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Chris?
So, from my perspective, what I think the role of a legislator is when it comes to many of these issues is not to stand and cheerlead on one side or the other. A lot of the things that we've been discussing here are specific projects, whether they're some of the mining projects or the International Outflow Interceptor. They're specific projects that we have to deal with. And what I think that the role of the legislator has to be, and what I commit to do, is make sure that the views of everyone who is involved in that particular project are represented when issues relating to it are traveling through the legislature. There was an issue in Patagonia, and the company took it around the local representatives to one up on the in another district in another part of the state. And that's not the way it's supposed to work, right? There should have been somebody from our legislative district ensuring that the voices of everyone was heard as the thing was working through the process. And that's what I would commit to do.
Thank you. Rosanna?
The environment. That is something we, all of us, as citizens, need to have concern about. As a legislator, I want to put more funding into the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, ADEQ. Their lack of funding, where most of their revenue comes from fees, and that's unacceptable to me. So when it comes to our water supply, there's 3 things I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about contamination, depletion, and subsidence. So let me talk about contamination. Contamination can come from industry. So ADEQ is our watchdogs in regards to that. If they are underfunded, they don't have enough staff to go out there and say, you need to mitigate your issues. When it comes to depletion, I feel very fortunate that I serve on the steering committee of the Drought Contingency Plan. This is 40 members that have come together, have through ADWR, Arizona Department of Water Resource, and the Central Arizona Project to talk about Lake Mead. So that is something that I'm very proud of, and I'm going to continue to give a voice to Southern Arizona. The last thing is subsidence, where there is overpumping, then the water settles down, and then there's actually where the earth moves down. So there's, again, overpumping is a concern. So when it comes to the environment, each citizen, we must be accountable, but we as legislators, I as a legislator, is going to make sure that we have the capacity and the staff to look and make sure that our environment is protected, and that is through ADEQ and also legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Daniel, your 30-second response.
I'm going to start by agreeing with Shelley that the IOI is an important issue for this district and for the state of Arizona. However, since 2016's presidential election, Republicans have been in control of the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and the presidency, and nothing was done. So if anything, this wasn't a failure of your legislators not doing enough. It was a failure of the Republican Congress, the Republican Senate, and the Republican in the White House. So we need to address this issue, but it has not been done. We need to keep working and advocating to make sure that we fix the IOI, because it is continuing and will continue to be a problem until it is addressed.
Thank you. Candidates, what do you think is the most important piece of legislature that you would like to see pass this term? Anthony.
Okay, so I would like to see the oversight in our various committees and commissions to actually have some accountability in them. So one of the big factors, again, I'm going to go back to India versus here. One of the big factors is that political behavior is overruling basic problem solving and representing you and your wishes and your needs and the success of your family and your children. So a lot of times there's a lot of demands of money, 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 but the oversight and accountability and the traceability is vacant. Therefore, what we continue to do is support and allow the growth of politics and not enough of problem solving. So I certainly want to look into the avenues in which how we can ensure the Attorney General has a little bit more accountability in enforcing lack of spending, school grounds sometimes being used for political means, governing school members not being accountable to the state laws. So these are the things that are very, very important. It's the very root of what's going on overall. So I certainly would like to look into that. The other thing is constitutional rights. Back in 2016, I wrote a House bill that was sponsored by Sitting House Representative HB 2050, which is a constitutional rights bill. And I'd like to go in there and push that through this session because it's very important. It's the right to protect your property, children, and your family. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thank you. I will reintroduce my Senate Concurrent Memorial 1020. This time it had 27 of the 30 senators as co-sponsors for a total of 50 out of 90 co-sponsors. It had a friendly amendment from Senator Gail Griffin because she has a wastewater issue in Naco, and if you Google that, you'll see that they also had a problem in the last few weeks. It was one of the only friendly amendments I can recall at my time, my 6 years in the legislature. I interact frequently. What an SCM does, it goes to the president, to the vice president, and to the Arizona delegation. In addition to going to them, the Secretary of State sends it out. In addition to going, whenever I am at Davis-Monthan for legislative and other events, the congressional delegation is there, and I have been a strong voice talking to them for people from Senator McCain's office, from Senator Flake, and the Congress people from Southern Arizona, some of the northern people, but Representative O'Halloran's staff is there. And they make a joke. Senator McCain's staffer, Shea Saucedo, said that we should make a song because Senator D'Alessandro is always lobbying for the IOI. And it is an international issue. It's caused by wastewater coming from Mexico. One of the current Nogales councilmen told me that it goes all the way back when Representative Ed Pastor was our congressperson. So it's a long-time problem. It's actually an international, but I keep urging Congress to work on it. My second part would be public education. And because Governor Ducey's pretending like the problem solved and there could be nothing from the truth. I see books that in schools that are dirty, tattered, and put together with tape. So we have to do better for our students in Arizona.
Thank you. Shelley.
Well, I do wish that the Senate Concurrent Memorial had gone out in 2016 and had started a little bit earlier, because we do need to keep working on that. And there was a delegation that went to Washington about 2 weeks ago, and they did discuss the IOI. The IOI is an international treaty, and therefore it's in the State Department. So when we start talking about this, again, it's a federal issue, and the best we can do is encourage our federal partners to work with us. We have many representatives in the state of Arizona. I would venture a guess that all representatives in the state of Arizona want to work on the IOI for your safety, because your safety is at risk because of that. But the legislation that I'm really interested in addresses many of the things that we've talked about today, and that's full funding for 4-year career and technical education. We can't find plumbers, carpenters, sheet metal workers, And in addition to that, I want to fund the 4-year JTED programs. But in addition to that, I have been, as a member of the Business and Industry Council, speaking with the superintendent and other members of the council about bringing a drone training program to Southern Arizona. Everything is going in that direction. 2 years ago, I was at an emergency preparedness event in Perry, Georgia as an advisor and an observer. And CNN was there, Fox was there, everybody was using drones in this emergency management scenario of an earthquake. Drones are going to be used to deliver packages. We use agri-drones for agriculture. Our ranchers are using drones to go out and look for cattle. So we need to be a little bit more innovative, so I'm going to push for JTED. And you know what? When people have jobs, it's that hand up out of poverty. Let's give our kids a chance.
Thank you. Chris?
I'm going to concur on the 4th-year funding for career and technical education programs. I sponsored a bill to restore 4th-year funding my first term, and in the second session, we had an issue with actually having to restore funding, and I pushed hard for that. I am a big believer in career and technical education programs. I see the impacts on the students that I teach every day. So that would be one of my top priorities. I am the only one on the stage here tonight who has actually had legislation that I was the prime sponsor on reach the governor's desk and be signed. Not a concurrent memorial, but actual legislation that changed the law. And none of the bills that I passed in the 2 years that I was there, and none of them grabbed headlines. They weren't about big, overarching themes. They were about specific issues in the district. A property tax issue in South Tucson, a flood control issue in Patagonia, nonprofit governance for Green Valley Recreational. But they made a difference to the communities. They made a big difference to the communities. So again, if I am fortunate enough to return, the vast majority of the work that I'm going to be working on is not driven by some national agenda or the latest topic of the day, but it is going to be about solving the mechanics of government for the communities that I represent.
Thank you. Rosanna?
We hear every day about the lack of revenue in the state of Arizona and how we don't have enough money to fund our services or whatever as a state we want to do. The state of Arizona, in my opinion, does 3 things. We do a lot more than this, but we educate, we medicate, and we incarcerate. So when saying that is I would like to see a bill that actually addresses tax loops for corporations, because we can bring more revenue into the state of Arizona, and we're not doing that. So I'd like to see some legislation that actually address that. We can't do that overnight. We're probably not going to do it, in 1 year, but we need to start looking at that and chipping away so that we can bring more revenue into the state of Arizona. And another thing I'd like to see is public education, really looking at how we fund public education. How we are able to bring our next workforce. And that is another piece of legislation I'd like to look at, is actually looking at funding public education in a very positive way and not having to sit there and have to worry every year if there's going to be enough revenue to pay for our public education, which seems like public education seems to be on the cutting floor every single year. When we don't have enough money, what do? We cut public education. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel?
There are a lot of things that I want to do next year, but I'll start with one that I think is important and affects all Arizonans, and that's reducing the sales tax rate, or the TPT rate, and increasing funding for the general fund, and by extension, education funding. We have over 320 or so exemptions in the sales tax code, from warranties on TVs to gym memberships. These are all things that you would think would normally get a sales tax, and they don't. and we have upwards of $1 billion in revenue that we are losing each and every single year. But what that has also meant is that we have a higher and higher sales tax rate, which negatively impacts the poorest in our community. And with a district that has a population that lives in poverty, reducing the TPT and the sales tax rate is vital to making sure that people have more dollars in their pockets. I myself introduced an exemption to eliminate the sales tax on feminine hygiene products, diapers, and formula. So there are some good exemptions and some bad exemptions, but we need to take a look at all of them, go through line by line and figure out which ones are the ones that we actually need as a state and which ones are not. I also worked in a bipartisan way to make sure that we address sexual assault as an issue here in the state of Arizona. I worked with 10 Republicans, including one of the most conservative members of the Judiciary Committee, my friend Maria Sims, to pass a bill that created a new protection for sexual assault survivors. I was the prime sponsor, passed unanimously in the House, got to the Senate. The senator who was the chair of the committee didn't read the bill, and it died. I brought it back as an amendment on another bill because of the relationships that I had. So for me, it's not about who gets the credit at the end of the day. It's about making sure that the policies and the laws that we are passing are helping every Arizonan. So expanding protections for sexual assault survivors, reducing the tax rate on sales for all of our poorest citizens, those are the kind of things that I want to go back to the Capitol to do, and the things that I have been doing as a legislator. So when we go back, I want to make sure that we increase the revenue so we can put that money to restore funding to pre-2008 levels. I've been lobbying and advocating for higher money for education since 2008. This was my 10th legislative session advocating. My second one as a legislator, and I want to go back to keep up that fight. Thank you.
Thank you. And Anthony, your 30-second response?
So you heard my views on accountability. So I certainly, as an engineer, I certainly do support the idea of JTED programs, the opportunity for our children to have hands-on experience so that they can, at the graduation from high school, they can either get a professional certification and become a working member of our society, or they can be encouraged from the JTED program to basically want to learn more theory, which would lead them to going on to college. So I think that's a huge benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, we will transition to the second part of the debate, where each candidate will receive a separate question with 1 minute to respond. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of questions this evening, and there are more. To that end, I'm not going to be able to have you opt in on an additional 30 seconds. We're just going to go through the questions and have you address them accordingly. Remember that you still may submit questions. However, at this point, we probably will not, unfortunately, get to them. But the first question is for Anthony. Anthony, where do you stand on women's choice?
So I believe this has to do with abortion. Certainly that's what it sounds like. Obviously, having been an orphan in India, and who knows what the circumstances in which how I was abandoned or left on the streets of Bellary, India, which is a satellite town of Bangalore, India. I was somehow brought to an orphanage called Matru Chaya, which gave me the opportunity of life. And the amount of people and family, I've got my wonderful daughter here, the people that I've exposed to, that I've gotten to know, that learning about Christian values and becoming an engineer and Eagle Scout, I'm pro-life. Certainly I'm pro-life because I would be contradicting my own life and my own experience if I'm not pro-life. I would also be contradicting my Christian values. My life is a living testimony, and I certainly am pro-life and not pro-choice, because that becomes an avenue of abortion. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, how many bills were you able to get through during your 2 years as representative?
My first year, I was committed to only introducing one bill because I wanted to make sure that I built the time to build relationships with the new legislators. My second session, I passed 3 bills in committee in which I was the prime sponsor. 2 passed out of the House unanimously. And like I said, the one that was a bill and not a memorial died in the Senate, but I brought it back, and then the governor vetoed it. But because of, again, the relationships that I had, we were able to bring it back even despite a gubernatorial veto to ensure that women and men who have been sexually assaulted have an additional protection that they didn't have before.
Thank you. Rosanna, what will you do to keep our school children safe?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Safety is very important in regards to our children. So having educators that have training in regards to taking care of our children, if it be behavioral health, being able to recognize if a child has behavioral health concerns, or being able to have safe campuses. So when it comes to our children being safe, it's very important that we keep our campuses safe. And also to keep our children safe is also to make sure that they get to eat. They're able to have a meal, that they're be able to be ready for school and be able to do that. And that I think is part of being to keeping our children safe in school. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, explain your decision to vote against Kids Care when you were in the legislature.
I did not vote against it. In fact, I was a part of a group of Republicans in the House that actually forced the issue to the floor. We were late in the session, and it was going to die, and so a group of us forced the issue to the floor and allowed it to go back to the Senate to be voted on. Again, we have issues with healthcare in our nation, and we have to come to grips with it. But the most vulnerable among us, especially our children, deserved that we would accept the federal money to provide health care for them. So I did vote for it.
Thank you. Shelley, how will you address the children separated and housed in Arizona?
That's an interesting question for me because, you see, I was in Washington, D.C. during earlier administrations when those policies were put in place. My husband and I moved to Arizona in 2007. Many of those policies were put in place prior to 2007. So what do we do? Look, parents and children should never be separated. Let's just be clear about that. I would be like a grizzly bear if you took my children away from me. So we need to address that. But again, this is a federal issue. I'm not running for the U.S. Congress, but more important than that, let's address the issue about not running background checks for the nonprofit association right here in southern Arizona that took care of those children. Let's talk about that today, or not right now.
Thank you. Andrea, what are your goals to improve state government?
Well, my strategic plan is to get more Democrats elected to the Senate. We're currently 13 to 17. I have to laugh because Democrats strongly opposed cutting the JTED program from 4 years to 3 years. And then they even cut some of the 3-year funding. So then the Republicans come in at the as the hero, the knight on the white horse, and say, you know, we saved it because we restored it. If they would have listened to the Democrats, who never wanted to cut it in the first place, we would have been better off. The same thing with tax. Our corporate taxes, Representative Gabaldon mentioned it. We don't have more revenue than we had years ago, especially when you inflation adjust it and look at population growth. We have had a terrible shifting from corporate taxes to sales tax to people who have little ability to pay for it. 74% of the corporations in Arizona only file the filing fee, and those are those are companies that are required to file corporate income tax. They're not subchapter S's. They're not other. There are charities that are corporations. It doesn't impact them. Just the pure corporations who are required.
Thank you. And at this time, we've had an abundance of questions this evening. We are going to go to our closing remarks, and the first closing statement will be given by Anthony. Please.
All right. Again, I'm Anthony Sizer. I'm running for office to represent you in State House of Representatives. I am an Eagle Scout. I am an engineer. I am down to the ground, not up in the sky, where you can actually approach me and to be able to help solve your local problems. This is one of the primary things that I've run into, having been in door to door. Basically, every resident has identified, wow, you're asking me what my problem is. I'm not here to be going into the office to join any group or any club, but I'm here to listen to your issues and problems and how to write a House bill to solve your problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Daniel.
My name is Daniel Hernandez, and I'm asking for your vote tonight because I'm someone who is able to bring people together. I'm able to make sure that we are finding common ground and solutions for all of Arizona, like when I brought together people to make sure that we defeated a bill that would have made it harder for people to prosecute those who committed sex crimes in the Judiciary Committee, like the bill that I worked on to ensure that there weren't as many frivolous lawsuits hurting and impacting our small businesses. And finally, like the work that I did to ensure that we extended Rio Nuevo to ensure economic development opportunities here in the region. But I'm also someone who's going to be a fighter for you. I'm someone who's going to stand up to the majority when I need to, like I did in a debate about women's rights and making sure that we were looking at healthcare-based information and data, as opposed to how do we intimidate women from making the choices that they are constitutionally allowed to make. I fought back against discrimination against the LGBT community and against the folks who are in our ELL classrooms to make sure that they are not continuing to be segregated for 4 hours a day, separated from the rest of the students because of bad policy that is driven by ideology and not by sound policy. So that's why I'm asking for your vote today. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosanna.
I'm so glad all of you came out tonight. It was wonderful to see all of you learn about all of us. But I humbly ask for your vote. I'm Rosanna Gavaldon. I'd like to continue serving as your Arizona State Representative because I do. I bring effective leadership, and I bring integrity, and I do bring experience. And that is something that's important, I believe, is to be able to serve you full time. Along with being a full-time legislator, I serve on 5 boards. I give back to my community. I'm available to my constituents, and I want to be your public servant. So again, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I am a Republican, and I am running in a district that is designed to be a safe Democratic seat. So you got to ask why. Well, I am a Republican, but that's not why I'm running. I'm running because I'm an educator with 19 years in the classroom and almost as many years in an advocacy position. I'm tired of working in a broken system. I'm running because I'm tired of Southern Arizona getting the short end of the policy stick when it comes to policies that get passed at the state legislature. I made a difference when I was there before, and I'm asking for your vote to go back and make a difference again for the communities that I represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Shelley.
Well, my name is Shelley Keiss, and I've spent 30 years as a businesswoman and business owner working in organizations to solve problems. Sometimes not easy problems, and in most cases, many of them in education, in educational institutions and government organizations. I have worked with Customs and Border Enforcement and Protection. I know what the numbers are coming across the border. I've worked with some of our fire departments. I've worked with our police. I've worked with our teachers. I'm ready to go to Phoenix to work for you, to work for our veterans that we have in our community, to work for our seniors, to work for our kids who are in poverty, and try and help them find a way out, to work for our small businesses. This is a job about constituent services. This is time for me to give back to you what I have been blessed to learn the last 30 years. My name is Shelley Keiss, and I'm asking for your vote, your support, and I'll be happy to take any questions with my name, and I'll get them answered and put them on my website.
Thank you. Andrea.
Thank you to Clean Elections and to all of you who came, some of the local people as well as the people from Tucson. Saying you support public education without providing a dedicated funding source is disingenuous. I'm a strong voice for Southern Arizona. I've also was named Legislator of the Year for my support of community health centers. I have to tell you, I'm very active in Facebook, and I'm not saying that she did it, but all the things that I fight for, I'm always at the VA. Just last week at the POWMIA events, I'm at the Veterans Home, I'm at the Rehab Center, at the Memory Center, fighting for our veterans, asking for more veterans benefit counselors. I've had almost 15 senior scam prevention events in Tucson, Sahuarita, Patagonia, Nogales, and Tubac. I give excellent constituent services, and please vote for me. My name is Senator Andrea D'Alessandro. Please keep my strong voice in the Arizona Senate, representing part of Pima and all of Santa Cruz County.
Thank you. And to all of the candidates, we thank you so much for participating in our forum. And to our audience members, all of you, thank you who took the time to inform yourselves to come out here before voting. We encourage you all to visit www.azcleanelections.gov/voter dashboard for a customized experience and to find more information on the general election, the candidates, the issues, and to view this debate on demand. So please do fill out the debate evaluation form and return it to one of our volunteers. Your feedback is very important and helps the commission to improve future debates. And thank you all for coming tonight. And you're welcome to stay and speak directly with the candidates. Have a great evening. Good night.